Okay, so we're gonna pose the rider now, and I did a little bit of prep work to get this ready. As you remember from the last video, the um, dragon that she rides is in there and positioned in the right place and kind of the right size and everything, so that's ready to go. Um, but I'm gonna turn that off for a second and just kind of walk through. What I did was isolate the armor bits to be posed. And so I kind of went through all the layers here and grouped everything together. And I can just kind of like walk you through that and show you that, the helmet is a separate piece. These arms right now are ready for pose. So even though they're separate materials of like buckles, straps, rivets, all that, I've got them sort of grouped together into one subtool so I can pose them. And then of course the chest piece is its own. And then the chest strap here is its own piece. And so again, like I've basically put the rivets and the leather together. Here we've got the belt as a piece, and then the hip armor, the skirt, we've got our knee pads and our shins, and then we have this whole boot element that goes underneath the shin guard as one piece as well. So most of that is hard surface and isn't really going to be bending. So the part that's, bending the organic form, we have this shirt that we might actually have to resculpt because I sculpted it, in a neutral pose standing, and we need to get the body pose to fit on the mount. And so but what we're going to start with is just the body. So I have the body now at a low sub D. Obviously the cape as well, we probably won't be able to use it because we'll have to kind of resculpt it, but it's a quick resculpt. So what I'm going to do is turn everything off and keep the body on because that's what we're going to be posing. So I'll turn everything off. And gotta turn that stuff off. Oops. Chest. Drop the knee pad. Oops. Turn off the chest. And so we just want the body on. Turn off the knee pads. I will turn on the creature because we are going to be posing our character around that. And so I kind of like where she is in the y-axis. So I don't want to mess with that too much. And I want to keep symmetry going as much as possible. So I'm going to come down here. I can also kind of do transparency and we know there's a few ways I like to do this. I usually start with like kind of the torso and then work our way out. In this case, I'm not worried about the center line because it is going to be covered, but we just need to make sure that the width is right. Don't want to adjust things too much. So let's get the legs about to where they need to be, and then that same turn can be the leg forward. About like so. Now I'm not worried too much about like pinching and stuff like that because again it's going to be covered with armor. Now of course if I was to have exposed areas where we're going to see skin, you do need to make sure that there isn't too much pinching going on. But for what we're doing, this should be working. And I can also kind of sculpt the saddle a little bit to fit her. I think that's probably about right. Let's get this back just a little bit and tilt and then come up. And that way we don't have to repose too much of it. I might actually tilt her forward just a notch so that she is taking the weight, counterbalancing it. So there we have that. And then I'm going to go into the knee now. Let's get that right on the joint, make sure that's accurately placed. I am going to blur my mask a little bit. And let's tilt that leg down and also in. And then just ultimately, like if you look at reference, I've looked at a lot of horse rider reference, and just to see how the body really does fall on a mount. And of course we can fix some joints and stuff once we get our basic armature right. And then the ankle will slightly hang down, just point the toe a little bit and then maybe tilt out like that, just so it feels kind of like it's naturally. And then we can kind of think about our camera, and I did talk about having about a 3/4 shot, something like this. Let's turn our floor on just for a second. It's kind of like a top down, something like this shot here. And it's not very dynamic. I know it's pretty simple, but this would be used to like present for a game or something where, like, you know, we're just seeing a character. So one thing right off the bat, I want to see the saddle just a little. Whoops. Just pop it in just a little bit so it works, even though we're not seeing these views. Just want it to ergonomically make sense. And we can also put some noise, some texture, because we have talked about noise, just like some leather, you know, texture, some definition to the saddle. Well, it would probably help to have symmetry on, so let's make sure that's on. Now I'm breaking through the saddle to the form, the back of our mount. Cool. So it looks like it's pretty accurate. And then now let's get the arm. Now I am thinking that, you know, the arms, this front arm here is probably going to be holding some kind of reins, and then this arm I think will just be sloping down with a sword in hand. So this is where we can go now into asymmetry. So what I'll do is, let's make sure and turn our symmetry off. Oops. Start with this arm. So there's going to be some shoulder posing, which of course requires the most fix edits. Once we get the armature right, then we'll have to fix some of the anatomy. And of course we are putting shoulder pads on, so we don't really need to spend too much time doing that, but we do know that the arm, so we're getting some weird. Okay, let's grab it like that and blur it. Put that right on the shoulder joint and bring that arm forward. And then of course, let me get my compass right. Have the shoulder pop up just a little bit, come forward, and of course, we're going to bring the arm towards the center, and then down. Something like that. And that's where we would see some reins happening. Now the arm is going to turn on the flexor, right? So your radius and ulna are actually going to rotate, so we can go to that elbow. Let's blur our mask a little bit. Let's get that right on the elbow. And we're going to follow the blue because that is perpendicular to the joint, right? So we can kind of roll the arm, something like that. Now I do like that it's hanging down because the wrist will bend and pop up a little bit to hold the reins, and so maybe bend the elbow just ever so slightly, something like that. And now let's go down to the wrist. Let's place that on the wrist joint, and again, reference. You know what? I actually want the wrist to break a little bit cleaner right on that line, so I'm actually not going to blur it. Just to give it a little tilt, like so. And then, so again, perpendicular on the joint, and we'll bring the wrist up a little bit like that. And I do have some already pre-built fists that I might use for the hands, but I'm just going to go in really quick with the move tool and kind of clean that up just a notch. Wherever we can fix stuff. Now I'm not really super worried about fixing the torso because again I am going to have to resculpt the undergarment. I can smooth this out a little bit if I want to, if I'm really worried about the center point. Let me turn my symmetry on for a second. Just getting that pinch to go away a little bit, and then maybe widen these hips just a notch. Even though, again, we are going to see, you know, the skirt that we built hang over this, so we won't really... I'm just going to pull some of these muscles up just a notch, just to get the accuracy, even though we won't really be seeing that. Just kind of pull that in. Okay, pretty happy with it so far. It's feeling natural. Maybe we'll tilt the head just ever so slightly, just to give it some life. So we'll come up here to the neck. Let's go right in between kind of the top of the head and the bottom of the neck and kind of put that joint right here. Just a little bit more, and then turn off symmetry for a second, then we can tilt our head towards camera a little bit. We could also tilt up or down. This is where we can kind of add some life to the pose. Something like that. We don't want to tilt too much, but just giving it a little bit of life, something like that. Ultimately, like I was saying earlier, you kind of want to accentuate some of the angles so that they match, especially like on a horse. But if you see like the angle of this leg and the angle of this leg, this arm is just coming down. You know, this arm is just coming down. They kind of mimic each other in the pose. And that being said, you want the head, so kind of where the creature is looking is a little bit where you would want the character, the rider, to be looking as well. Okay, so now the last arm here is going to be this arm, and because she's holding a sword, I really just kind of want to put the weight. Now imagining the sword is going to be kind of, you know, hanging down a little bit, something kind of like that. Turn that forearm just a little bit, like that. And then I'm going to grab the wrist and tilt it forward just a little bit, because I know that the sword is going to be on this slope. And if you really wanted to, you could actually go and turn the sword on. if that helps you, just to get an idea of, so the sword would probably stick out something like that. Down. This sword really is just a placeholder. I haven't really spent any time designing it the way I'd like to, but that's okay. So something about that you want to put, see, because you can kind of see now that if I shot it at this angle, I wouldn't really need a fist. This hand actually works as far as it looks like it's holding the sword. Yeah, you want to get it something like that. So if that helps you to have the sword, now this sword isn't a big knight sword, which actually is fine, but if you wanted the sword to feel bigger and heavier, you probably want the weight of the sword to kind of tilt down like that because it's so heavy. It also gives it a little more of a dynamic vibe. So again, now that we're messing with the angle a little bit more, we could go in and start playing with the fingers. Now you can either pose the hand by grabbing each finger. Again, I might just collapse it. I could even smooth it out and sort of just insinuate that it is a fist like that if I really wanted to. So there's that option. I probably don't want to do that though. Yeah, we can go and kind of adjust one finger at a time. And then of course you can do the same that we've been doing here with the masking of the fingers. Usually it's one finger at a time, so it is a little bit of a tedious process to make a fist, but that's something that probably we'll have to do at some point. That's something I used to do, is kind of, whatever the hands were doing, I'd kind of resculpt that every time, and then eventually I just had a library with fists in it, and I stopped making a fist every time because it was taking a lot of time. Obviously, if it's an asset that's going to be getting used, then then you'll have to make the fist because it will all have to be connected and working. But okay. Well, that's working. So it looks like we've got our pose pretty close to what I want. So now if we were to start putting the armor back in, now even though we saved all of our subdivisions, because if we ever were going to show any body part, we would want our detail to come back. We have a nice detailed pose where we have kept our details in her anatomy, but we're covering it with armor, so it doesn't really matter. We just want to make sure that the form is working, especially in the armature, so that the skeleton really is what's correct. So we could at some point maybe even delete the body, the parts that we're not using, because it does just take up space, especially once we get it into render and we start importing. It's just going to be extra geometry that's not seen. Okay, so now we can go in and start kind of working the armor. Now, because I didn't do much with the torso, some of this stuff might just actually line up perfectly. I wonder if I can get anything out of the shirt. Most likely not. So I might have to just resculpt some of that. But if we were to try and salvage this shirt, I'm going to go and put it basically on the pivot point where I moved the body forward in the first place, and kind of tilt it forward and see, hey, did we... It's pretty close. Like, I think we can actually use most of it, really. I mean, the neck's working, and the stomach, which is really the only part that we want out of it. And then we could, of course, go into... Now, obviously, if I had planned on posing the shirt, I would have kept lower subdivisions, but that's okay. Because we're putting armor over this, it doesn't really matter if there's some areas that pinch and break, so we're really going to grab that elbow. Whoops, we don't want symmetry on. I'm kind of grab that elbow and see if we can't salvage that piece. Ooh. Pretty good. Yeah, not bad. So, of course, we can always, fix whatever we need to. Now, the good thing about this shirt is that it already lines up with the armor that we made. So, yeah, let's see if we can. Now, these pinches that are happening in the arm right there, that's where the straps go. Obviously, this is cut out because that's where the shoulder pad is. The gauntlets, like any of that, the only areas that are sculpted are on the inside because that's what we're seeing. Let's just test really quick if we were to go back and put this, again, the same pivot point that we tilted the body from, which is right here on the hip. Take that and see if we can just slide the chest piece forward. Same pivot, and it might just line up pretty perfectly. Obviously, we didn't do a lot of torquing or anything like that, but in some cases, you'd want to twist the torso so that there would be a lot of changes happening here in the chest piece. But okay, so as I do this, I do want to save a little more frequently just so I don't lose. I'm going to call this mount 2. Now the part that might be a little harder to salvage will be the bottom of the shirt. So in this case, I have these flaps that are they're actually separate, so I can grab them, and this is where I might actually turn symmetry back on, so I can grab these flaps and again put that pivot out there on the hip where I had it before, and see what happens if I raise them. And I think they'd probably tilt in a little bit. So there's this piece of the shirt that kind of falls over the leg. And again, I'm thinking about the weight here, right? So, if this is kind of a softer material, I'm going to go readjust that. Something like that. Remember, our hip armor is going to cover some of that. So let's try and get that. Tilt back a little bit, and then so I can only really get so far with the compass, and then I'll need to go in and actually use the move tool and sculpt that. So, but before we get to the skirt, I wanted to see if I could get this other arm. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to use the lasso. Let me solo this really quick, turn those off. Go right up to the armpit like that. No, don't want symmetry on. Just grab that arm. I want to grab a little bit more of that, something like that. This I might want to blur my mask. And you can blur it a few times, and that way you won't get too much of a crunch when it's really stiff, and it's also 1.3 million, so just get that right on the shoulder. See if we can't slide it forward. Slide it forward like this. Now, a lot of this you won't see because, again, there'll be straps, and then you'll have your shoulder armor. You probably will see the inside of the shirt right there, so something kind of like that. And then Remember the elbow, we twist to get the flexor, so the top of the forearm. So let's go put that on the right pivot point, and it's going to kind of come forward like that. So I know some of you might be seeing this and thinking this is why Transpose Master would make sense if it can do this for you. But I feel like you'll still have to go and kind of correct quite a bit. So that's pretty close. So now what you can do is go in with the move tool and just kind of pull the shirt over the form. See, I got that weird split, but that's okay because it's going to be covered with armor, and we're also not really seeing that angle. Yeah, so I'll have a strap here, so I won't have to worry too much about that, but I do kind of want to have that wrinkle coming in. So it might be helpful to put the armor on first and the straps, and then come back and sort of readjust. But ultimately, you can kind of choose, like, hopefully most of you didn't do the undersuit until the pose, but if you have done the undersuit already and it's in a neutral pose, you can kind of decide, is it quicker for me to repose it or just resketch it? And then as far as these pieces, you can kind of, let me turn symmetry back on, kind of get those back along the form of the body. The back of the skirt, let's turn that on for a sec. You can either just imagine that she's sitting on that and it's going underneath, kind of tucked in, something like that, or it's on the back side of the saddle. But either way, my camera's not really seeing it, so I don't want to spend too much time because I have established my camera shot. Sometimes I'll take like a screen grab in ZBrush, just, you know, off this screen right here, and kind of say, okay, this is locked in now, this is what my camera is going to be, and then I'll match that camera in Keyshot, of course. But yeah, so far so good. Let me save this out. And now I can start putting, I think, some of the hard armor on. So first thing first, maybe we'll put this chest piece on. I think a lot of these pieces that are on the chest, I can just kind of go back to that same pivot point and roll them forward, and a lot of them might just kind of fall right into place. That's pretty lucky. Yeah, I can just kind of tilt it. So let's kind of do that with everything. Grab the belt here. Belt hasn't moved much. It's pretty close to what, you know, her center point of her body. It kind of stayed in the same position, but, and then what I am getting for free is that I kind of sculpted my shirt around these pieces, so they're working pretty good. I can also kind of, keep adjusting my undershirt now to kind of fall correctly on there. So one thing for, you know, when I sculpted this, I was sculpting it from the front view, but now knowing my established shot here, I probably would see a little more side view, so we might kind of decorate or sculpt the side of the belt a little bit more, depending on, you know, if you have the time, or if you, depending on how far your camera is away. If it's really close up and you're seeing the side view, you might want to sculpt some stuff on there. Also, kind of the shirt itself, you might see a little more wrinkles. Okay, so that's all looking good. Now let's see what happens when we throw before we do the hip armor, let's maybe try the shoulder armor. So we'll turn these pieces on. Again, let's put our pivot point back right at the hip here and see if we were just to roll this forward, it would kind of fall. And I'm just looking at the her right shoulder. The left shoulder, obviously, we're gonna have to tilt it a little bit to match. And the straps came with it, so that's nice. Looks like everything's falling into place pretty well. Okay, so now let's again, we can kind of fix whatever. It looks like those straps are working pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna isolate the this gauntlet, so her right arm gauntlet. Turn symmetry off. And then let's go up to the elbow and see if we were to tilt that back. Pretty close. And of course we won't really see the inside of this arm because you know, we're seeing a shot from here. I do like how the sort of undersuit piece is hanging out right there. I think one thing is that there's a little bit more rotation happening here, so I'm gonna go, let's go rotate that just a little bit. I feel like if that was the top of her hand, you kind of want the top of the gauntlet to line up with the top of her hand. So you actually would probably rotate it a little bit more. Kind of something like that. It might not work as well with the undersuit, but that's okay. We can kind of resculpt that stuff. So if you want to kind of work as you go, you can do that right off the bat by kind of like grabbing the undersuit and kind of pulling it to fit. Let's turn this energy out. Cool. Not like we're gonna see that anyway, because you know it's we know our camera. You know, one thing I haven't done on, I never finished on her armor, was there's actually elbow pads that I was gonna put in. Pull those straps out a little bit. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so now let's save it again. And now for the tricky part, which is going to be this side. So let's grab this shoulder piece and this is a little trickier because this armor is like plated, like it has sections. And I think if she were to bring her arm up, like how it is, there would be some overlay happening. Like for one, this is going to come up. And then we're going to see, let's get that on the right pivot. As you can tell while I'm doing this, you can probably see that if your pivot is off, it's going to mess everything up. So you really want to get those pivots right on where the actual joint of like the arm is turning. So pop that up. It's pretty close. Now what I'm doing is I'm getting the blue, this axis to line up perpendicularly so that I'm still on my joint is still on the shoulder, and I'm just going to roll that forward. Close it off a little bit, something like that. Now the only problem is, like I said, you get this weird, probably what would happen is the bottom part, like these 1, 2, 3 would kind of come with the arm, whereas this top part might stay where it is a little bit longer. This is another reason why you see these little rivets that I put on here. Sometimes you can wait until it's posed to do that. There's a lot of tricks that you can do to kind of you know, salvage, or should I say, not waste time of stuff that you've already sculpted. So I do like what's happening, but I'm actually going to go back to putting this shoulder piece kind of where it is. I think is, it's working. I'm just going to bend it just a little bit, maybe something like that. Again, taking into account the camera, like we're seeing the inside piece of this shoulder, which hasn't been hollowed out yet. So right now it's just like a shape. I used like a cylinder where this would actually have a cut and we'd see kind of into that armor. So this just proves my point why you want to know your shot a lot of times, like so you have it sketched out before you even start sculpting, so you kind of know what you want to be sculpting. But I think so really I'm just paying attention to getting this to work. Just pull back a little bit. Yeah, so you kind of want to see that armor overlap. And then what I'm going to do is isolate these pieces in here so that they don't, and I'm going to go get that rivet so it doesn't come with it. Oops. And then this one, I'm just going to paint him. Oops. Undo that and just turn that on dots real quick and paint that rivet just so it doesn't come with. Okay, so really what I've got is kind of those pieces isolated. Let me just really quickly get everything else so it's all masked. So kind of if we were to look at this as a separate piece, we really just want to move that part. I guess we can bring, oops, we could bring the forearm with it, but okay. So we're really just working on those. Now I could of course just split this stuff if I wanted to, but so now I'm gonna, I think I might go to the same sort of pivot and kind of pull that up, because that's kind of what would happen. Bring that down in there like that, and maybe tilt, let's see, something like that. And you notice how the straps now are hugging the bicep correctly, which is really what the armor would do. It'd kind of break into little plates like that. So as I'm doing this, I can kind of start fixing stuff right away where I can say like, yeah, I like how these straps are looking, but I need them to kind of show a little bit more. And also the shirt can kind of work around the straps. I'm getting some weird pinch, that's okay. But yeah, this part of the shoulder would probably kind of come out, and then, yeah, something like that. And again, I am thinking like, so like in my camera shot, that is gonna show. So I do want these wrinkles to kind of look accurate. So I'm just gonna spend a little bit of time just getting that right, and then of course, this elbow can kind of get tucked in. So really like the armor that we're seeing on this arm is just kind of the sides of it. You can also kind of tuck that shirt back in just a little bit so we can kind of see that plate popping out. Something like that, which actually is pretty accurate, like how the armor would look and also how it would move. Okay, so now we can grab this last gauntlet right here. Again, I'm gonna save just so I don't lose any of my work. And as we remember, this guy is, well, we can go kind of from the joint that we were at and kind of bring his, let's put that a little bit closer here. And we know that, oops. Let's move that down to the elbow because that's where the rotation's happening from. So kind of say, yeah, this is gonna, and then down. So really it's the top of the hand which you use to guide the gauntlet. So I kind of like the pivot being there. Let me just get that elbow right. So you can move the pivot, you know, like if it's lined up on the wrist properly, then kind of get that there and then push it down in. Something like that. Again, so, you know, I'm thinking, what's my camera going to show? Like, this is the gauntlet that I'm going to see. It's going to be this angle, right? So I'll see the straps, push that down on the hand a little bit more. Close it down on the forearm a little bit, and then rotate it just ever so slightly. Maybe actually, I think I might have kept it where it is. It's actually looking pretty good. So now I'm just going to grab that undersuit again and kind of tuck it in around the straps. Just to make sense of it. So I am still getting this weird pinch, but that's okay. This is kind of the price to pay for not having resculpted it. Also, I never did my elbow pads. I mean, you could go in and smooth it out, but at this point, it's such a high res at 1.3 mil. This is stuff you can work out in post as far as paint overs, and you know, once you get into Photoshop, you can do some correction. You know, well, you can do everything in post if you want. You just kind of pick where your shortcuts are. But I think for the most part, it's pretty close. I'd also like to put some kind of glove element on her hands. Maybe she has some fingerless gloves or something that we can go in and create eventually. But all right. And now that I've put everything on there, I do kind of want to just adjust the wrist ever so slightly. The hand is one thing that we actually will see out of this whole body here. So if I were to kind of have everything on and I can see, I want to tilt this up a little bit. Somehow missed a couple fingers in there. Let's go redo that. Put the pivot on the wrist, slide that up a little bit. Something like that. Cool. And then we can put reins in her hands. Feels about right. And you can adjust this too, like once you actually like build, you know, a leather strap or something that she's using to control the mount, then you can put it in her hand and start readjusting and finessing. Okay, I think I'm liking where it's at. So now let's move on to hip armor. Might just leave my figure in a low sub D, but it's obviously aesthetically more pleasing to look at when you see a little more detail of what you. I see right here there is a part where like her breast is kind of breaking through the breastplate, so I'll push that back in a little bit. And voila. So yeah, the only thing that is a little off to me is right up in here where I would actually see a cutout of how that cylinder would be cut so that it would slide over her shoulder. So that's something that we can work on. Maybe get the undersuit to work a little better right there. So the one kind of thing that I did gain out of doing the undersuit is I have these sort of nice wrinkles that are following the weight of how she's posed. So it is working. Cool. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's go turn on hip armor and solo these out for a second. So I know the pivot can almost be right where it placed it, which is right on the tip of where that little leather strap is holding onto the belt. Let's see if I were to just kind of... Now this hip armor is going to have a similar situation that's happening here on the shoulders, where like they're plated. So they're not all going to be a static piece that's moving together. They're going to be moving in sections. So something that you can think about is, you know, this first kind of piece of armor probably would fall almost right where it is, maybe just a little bit up, something like that. And probably would tilt back too. So the thing about armor is that, you know, some of it looks really cool, but then when you actually see someone riding a horse or running with it, you're like, yeah, it doesn't work. Some of the coolest looking armor doesn't make any sense at all. It like has to function, and so probably tilt like that, a little bit like that. Yeah. If anything, I think I'm gonna pull it back a little bit, something like that. It's probably really what you would see is it would kind of just think about the form of the body, right? You can almost, you know, I sculpted this when she was standing, but really you'd almost want to sculpt it after it's posed. But so I'm just paying attention to this first piece. And then as far as my little strappy guy over here, I can kind of come and isolate that and say, yeah, I want that to pop out and hang on the belt, something like that. So that was a pretty quick fix, tilt. So that's working. That's what's going to make sense of everything. So now I can kind of start isolating piece by piece. In this case, I think I really want everything except for this top piece. So I'm going to get those rivets in there. And also I don't need that guy. So I'm just grabbing these three bottom pieces here and adjusting. It's kind of the next thing to adjust. So the pivot of that would be wherever this is, you know, hooking together, it'd probably slide up, something like that. And also using the green one here, it's going to rotate forward like that just to catch the anatomy of the leg. Now I don't want to have too big of a gap right there, so it is kind of nice and closed. So this is where, you know, the way this armor probably works is it would kind of slide back and then tilt, right? Because you don't want to get too much of a gap. You could also kind of reverse it really quick, going with your move tool. You don't want to get, you know, you are assuming these are made out of metal. You don't put on symmetry real quick. There we go. That. And of course, all this middle center here, you remember we have a kind of a loincloth piece that's going to be hanging, so we don't have to worry about it. But because as soon as you put like a shiny material on there, you're going to get probably some weird, see that bend? It's almost like a dent. You're trying to avoid that. What you want is, you know, what's happening on the breastplate and the arms here, which is like a smooth, almost machined look, even though it probably was hammered by some blacksmith. Okay, and then the last little guy, we're going to, we're just going to isolate that piece. Okay. I'm looking at the bottom of this because I don't want to leave any soldiers behind. So make sure and kind of just get these guys, and then let's rotate it up just a bit. And then maybe go back a notch, rotate. And that's pretty cool. Would probably also fall forward a little bit, kind of just like, you look at this with transparency on, so it's going into the leg just a little bit. So the truth is it would probably actually be kind of something like, you know, pull it out a little bit. Probably something like that. And I'm pretty happy with it now that it's all one piece again. I can kind of pull the whole thing up again, and then I'll use a little bit of cheating artistic license just to push the leg down a tiny bit right there, and then I'm going to go tuck that skirt back in. Some kind of wonky stuff going on here, but whatever. We're not going to see that anyway. Tuck it in. Cool, so the hip armor is looking pretty cool. I want to fix that split right there really quick, so I'm going to grab my move topological and just grab, oops. I want to think of this like the shape should be as round, as round as possible, so that it feels, you know, the most like actual armor. And I can also kind of fix, get some weird kind of kinks happening here where voila. Okay, cool. So obviously, you know, I don't need to get too crazy with the detail because it's, again, going to be shot from about here. You won't see that detail. Okay, so now let's save. So pretty far, pretty fast. The next things, you know, obviously are going to be the legs with the knee pads and whatnot, and the helmet, and then just the cape, and our pose is done. And then we'll get into exporting everything out for Keyshaw. So let's finish her out and then get prepped for Keyshaw. Okay. Let's get the rest of this armor in the right spot. So we've got the helmet. Again, we'll go from that pivot point here, rock forward, pretty close, go up to the neck. We want that pivot point where the head was when we did the tilt. I know we, oops. Kind of went here, and then a tilt, here, tilt. Forward. Pretty close. Okay, there's our helmet. We can throw the eyes on if we want. Wherever they are. Looks like they're here. Same thing. Pivot down here. Forward. And I've just been doing this forever. That's why I'm pretty decent at getting the pivot to the right spot. We can adjust that accordingly later, but for the most part, you won't really see it, but I did want to pop some eyes in there. Okay, eyes, helmet, all set. Let's save our mount, save replace. Okay, and then we can move on to let's do the legs now. Okay, so probably start with the feet and then the shin guards and then the knee pads or something like that. But so if you remember correctly, we probably don't actually really need anything but the foot on this. So just kind of get that to the right spot. Really, I'm just lining the ankle up at this point. Oops. Let's go put that pivot right on the ankle. Something like that. Let me click on this and just check it with the transparent and just see. Cool. So this guy, which I can kind of separate and then kind of break it at the ankle. I'm gonna blur that mask. And then kind of, oops, put that on my pivot point. Just kind of put that on the leg, about as close as I can get it. Oops. That's probably good enough because it is going to be covered by the shin guard, so I don't really honestly care how perfect this is, but yeah, really I'm just wanting to make sure that ankle looks right. Now I can go back and fix that once I get the shin guard on, but let's do that real quick. Now the shin guard obviously needs some work as well because I never did the side, but now that I kind of know. Now what I'm doing is I'm using, the green to be oops, because I want that shin to tilt out just a little bit. So this is where I can kind of play with that. Let's go put our pivot down by the ankle real quick and drop that back. can tilt that toe out just a little bit. So kind of like that. And then also we'd see the top of it a little bit more. Kind of like that. I actually might tilt forward just a notch. Something like that. And remember, our base here of this foot is not super important. I'm not going to go and pose it. I'm actually just going to kind of embed it and hide it in there like that. Okay. Let's tuck this in. Let's also tuck that in a little bit. Cool. Yeah, you could probably spend a little bit of time getting that perfect if you want. I think for the sake of the demo, I can just kind of leave it as is for now. Okay. And then the last piece would be the knee pad, which is here. Cool. And this is where you would probably want something similar to what she's wearing on the top, like some kind of undersuit on the thigh that you can plug in. So this weird artifact on the sword I just want to grab really quick. Okay, looks like that is its own thing, so that's... I'm also thinking, you know, this is still kind of just a placeholder, but at least getting it somewhat accurate and straight for render will help. Anyway. yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time on this sword because I'm going to probably put something else in. It's just a plug for now, but okay. So we've got our sword. And the last piece would be this loincloth. I do like the way it's hanging. If anything, I'll probably keep it where it's at and just pull it out. Just kind of assume that she's sitting on it. You could also turn symmetry on for a sec, but you could have a part of a saddle here that kind of pops up with like a handle on it or something. And that's really what the camera is going to see, is something like that. I'm just kind of doing like final like little subtle nuances of like how I want it to read in my camera as far as how kind of things fit together. Cool. All right, and so the last thing to do would be the cape, and a little bit of work on the claws, probably some spikes on the character, on the creature, if we want to, and then of course the cape can be hanging on her, just to kind of see where our cape is at right now. Obviously it's not going to work, but you can kind of see what it would do if it was hanging. So you probably could just put it on one side of the character or the creature, and I think I actually have subdivisions on this. No. Okay. Well, a couple ways you could do this. You could kind of rebuild the cape, or you could also assume that the cape splits maybe, and there's two halves that hang, and half of it's on each side. You could do something like that. I do like the look of the cape. Let's try to move topological, or sorry, move elastic for a second and see if this might actually just move it out of the way for us. Yeah, the cape is gonna fall, and then it's gonna kind of pinch and come over the. This is an interesting use of move elastic, but it seems to be working kind of in assuming that this cape is folding over. Anyway, I probably wouldn't do this. I would resculpt it, but just to give you a quick demo on how you could use the move elastic. You can always switch back to the move if you don't want it to keep warping everything so much, but at least you get the idea. If there were a cape hanging in our camera shot, you're really just going to kind of see it from this view. We get something along those lines. Something like that. All right, so I think our pose is good. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup and also putting on a few more details, but I'm not going to record that. And then I'm going to start the next video, which will be getting everything ready for export based on material groups and import it into KeyShot.